it's been a little trouble getting to this point, but now, we've got a sense of humor, so it's fun. It's good, yeah.
Do you know what?
Two boys.
Identical or?
Fraternal. Yeah, so, yeah, it's funny. The battle for real estate's already on. Hey, David, how are you? Nice to meet you. How's,
Again, huh?
Neil Levesque, I know you want to.
Back again. Thank you. I tell you what, it never ceases to amaze me. People are so all right, you got it?
Got a little piece of tape there.
Good man. Thank
All
you
right,
very
does
much.
that work?
Works for me if it works for you.
Works for me. All right, you're all set.
It's not on. You're going to turn it on?
It's on, but I'll control. You won't be heard until
Very
you're
good,
up
very
on the
good.
stage.
You never know what I'm going to say over lunch. I don't necessarily want to go over loudspeaker. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Someone dropped the winning Powerball ticket. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neil Levesque, and I'm the Executive Director here at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, and I wanted to welcome you here to St. Anselm College. So as we get started with the introductions, I would like to call up Dr. Stephen DeSalvo, the new president of St. Anselm College.
Thank you and welcome. Welcome to the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, or as I like to call it, Senator Ayotte's home away from home. I want to thank you for joining us. This afternoon we look forward to a discussion on America's role in the world. It only takes a simple look at the headlines, whether it is the growing threat of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, the outbreak of Ebola in West Africa, or the continued unrest in the Ukraine, to understand the need for America to maintain a strong role in the world. In New Hampshire, the U.S. GLC has assembled a distinguished group of bipartisan leaders, both Democrat and Republican, who believe that America must be a global leader, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it is the smart thing to do. I am proud to stand with the GLC and its effort to advance strong and effective international programs. I know that our special guests today, Senator Kelly Ayotte and Governor Tom Ridge, join us in this pursuit. Senator Ayotte, the bipartisan New Hampshire leaders gathered here today, and thank you for your dedication to these issues, and we look forward to this conversation. This afternoon, we have the unique opportunity to hear from two experts on how America's small investment in our development and diplomatic programs help to build a strong economy, fight terrorism, support allies, and create stability around the world. So now to introduce you a little more to the USGLC and its work around the country, please help me welcome the USGLC President and CEO, Liz Schreier.
Thank you, and it is an honor to be back here to partner with you, Steve, and Neil, and the Institute of Politics. I think we've been here about a half a dozen times over the year, and I am thrilled. There were a lot of reasons why I wanted to come to thank you, but particularly to thank you for a recent friend of mine. And the friend that I wanted to thank you for is a woman on the screen named Veronica. And Veronica is a woman that I met from a very rural part of Tanzania. Have any of you been to Tanzania? A few of you in the audience. I got there flying a very small plane, which I don't like to do. And I got there from then in a little bitty car up a bumpy road, and then walking to this very rural farm. And as I got there, there was a group of women that greeted me in this song that I didn't understand. And one woman, Veronica, jumped out in front of me and said, "I want to be on the internet." And I did what all great Westerners do. I grabbed my iPhone and I hit play. And she wanted to tell me her tale. And she told me the reason she wanted to be on the internet is because she wanted me to thank America. And she told me the tale of how she had been part of the USAID, the Agency for International Development program called Feed the Future. That she had been given what her husband called these magic beans. They were seeds to try to fight against some drought, to be able to bring greater crop. And her husband didn't believe the magic beans would do anything, so she said, okay, we will divide our little plot of land. And so they divided it down the middle, she tells me, and his side of the small plot of land floundered, and her side flourished. She told me how she learned how to grow her plot of land and then how to bring her crops to market. I asked her what she did with her crops, and she told me she now has a used truck. She told me how she now is able to educate all 11 of her grandchildren, and she told me how she is now training 15 other women in her village about the same tools that she learned from America. And she wanted to be on the internet so she could ask me to thank America, not for giving her a hand out, but for giving her a hand up. So I brought that back with me, and as I was coming here for my many visits to this fabulous state, I thought what I want to share with you just in these brief opening comments is how lucky we are to not just be able to thank the story of Veronica, but to invest in a program like Feed the Future that is leveraging $7 billion of private funds from this small little investment in USAID, that is having raised 7 million farmers out of extreme poverty, and that I got lucky enough to come to a state that totally gets it. Because you in New Hampshire understand when you have just what Steve, you were saying, and Neil was saying earlier tonight, or Dick, what you were saying it in just this afternoon, is that 95% of the world's consumers live outside of this country. And you in New Hampshire are exporting 25% of your jobs come from exports. And a continent like Africa, 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies are in that continent, or on that continent. I certainly know that our 2 fabulous guest speakers totally get it. My friend Tom Ridge, when he was Homeland Security, our first Homeland Security Secretary, understood and told all of us and taught all of us about how the safety of our country is all about being engaged in the world and investing in the little 1% called the international affairs budget makes a difference to us. How lucky you are to have a senator like Kelly Ayotte who understands this very issue. And luckily, the 2 of them are not alone. I am very lucky to represent an organization called the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, who we were called by the Washington Post many years ago, the Strange Bedfellow Coalition. And you know, Washington is not known for a place in this country that brings people from different diverse backgrounds together, and yet we do, and we're really proud of it. Now, a lot of you are familiar with us, but some of you are new to us. We have a coalition of over 400 businesses, NGOs, and faith-based organizations that come together, everything from CARE to Caterpillar, from Raytheon to Red Cross, from World Vision to Walmart, and many others. We have an advisory council that Tom Ridge, we're lucky enough to be part of it. It's bipartisan. It is led by General Colin Powell. It includes every former living Secretary of State from Henry Kissinger to Hillary Clinton and all those in between. And they are on what I call the who's who of foreign policy and national security. We have a growing military voice that lends its voice to the engagement and the importance of non-military tools, this idea of development and diplomacy alongside defense that needs to keep us safe. 150 retired 3- and 4-star military leaders that have joined our cause. Some of you were here a few years ago when we sat in this room with General Tony Zinni, who chairs that very effort. There are over 30,000 veterans for Smart Power that have formed and joined along with us. And I don't think anything speaks more clearly to why they joined us. My friend General Jim Mattis, who at the time was commander for CENTCOM, and he was testifying in front of the Armed Services Committee, and one of the senators asked him, General, there are efforts to cut the international affairs budget, the foreign aid budget. What do you think of that? And he turned to the senators on the Armed Services Committee and he said, if you cut the State Department budget, you will need to give me more ammunition. That's what these military leaders tell me over and over again. They tell me that we need to be ready to react, but we have to have the strength to make sure that we can prevent. So I know that I travel around the country, but it is the strength of the people in this room that really make the difference. I thank our partners, many of whom are in this room, and if you look at the back of the program, you can see the different organizations that have made this possible. The New Hampshire Institute of Politics, of course, the New England Council, the Business Industry and Association of New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Veterans of Foreign Wars, and the New Hampshire World Affairs Council. I thank all of you, as well as the long list of fabulous individuals who make up the USGLC's New Hampshire Advisory Committee members. It is you, the voices of this state, that really are the backbone of what makes us strong. I happen to know that you have a pretty important voice in this country. You seem to get a lot of people who come here every 4 years. They seem to come here a little more often than just a couple weeks before that primary that's important. And so I'm going to end by asking you this. Our conversation today is about what America's role in the world is all about and why it matters to New Hampshire. I believe it is more important than ever, not only because it's the right thing to do, because when I met Veronica, I knew it, but it's the smart thing to do for our economy and our security. And I ask you to use your voice loud and clear. Reject those who believe that we should be isolationists. Tell them that you in New Hampshire reject that and that you want our politicians, whatever they are running for, particularly president, to embrace the idea, just like your senators and your congressmen do, that we have to be engaged in the world, and this little 1% is one of the tools that really count. So I thank you. I thank you for being here today, but I thank you more for raising your voice and to doing what our mission is all about, and that is just written right here, to build a better, safer, and I will add, more prosperous world. And that is really what we work at day in and day out, and I know that's what Tom Ridge and Senator Kelly Ayotte are all about. So to introduce our fabulous guest speakers, I want to introduce two of our great leaders from this state. Please welcome Katrina Lantos-Sweat from the Lantos Foundation and Rich Ashew from BAA Systems to welcome our guests. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Before I begin my very brief remarks, I would first like to express, on behalf of every single person in this room, our incredible gratitude to the veterans of this country for the extraordinary sacrifices that they have made that make it possible for us to build a better, safer world. And I'd like to ask any veteran here with us today to please stand so we can acknowledge you. Thank you so much. I'd also like to suggest that everybody here take a deep breath, because we are actually in a somewhat rarefied atmosphere. In a time and in a day when discussion of vital public policy issues has become so unbelievably toxic and so unbelievably partisan that you really are almost afraid to take a deep breath. We find ourselves gathered here today, Republicans and Democrats, people from every walk of life, in just the sort of discussion that this country and this world so desperately needs. And so I want to pay tribute to Liz Schreier and to the U.S. Coalition for Global Leadership for having created something quite extraordinary, becoming rarer and rarer in our world, but more desperately needed. It is bracing, it is invigorating, and it feels very good to be able to stand here and sit here together as friends who care passionately about this country and our future to discuss the ways in which we leverage our nation's power for good in the world. I'm here sort of representing the human rights and humanitarian side of that equation. I'm the president of the Lantos Foundation for Human Rights and Justice, and I also serve as chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. And I have always believed, I come by it honestly as the daughter of my late father, Congressman Tom Lantos, who was a co-founder of the Congressional Human Rights Caucus, but I have a passionate belief that America's leadership in the world is enhanced and strengthened when we lead from our strengths. Now, our strengths are manifold and many. We have extraordinary economic strength and military power. But above all, it is our values that distinguish us from our enemies as well as those who are merely our adversaries. And when we lead from our strength, from that which sets us apart, we are making a very smart play on the world stage for winning hearts and minds and ultimately winning the conflicts that are out there. Development, our diplomatic budget, the things that USGLC is working to protect and expand in our government are really putting, meat and muscle on the bones of those values. And so it is really hard to overstate or to overestimate the importance of your mission and what we are about. And I think today is very much symbolized, this sense of bipartisanship and joining together in a common purpose that is greater than us all by my friend and colleague up here to whom I'm going to turn over the mic. You know, Rich is a businessman and a very successful one. I'm a human rights activist. I'm a Democrat and he's a Republican. We're both former congressional candidates as well, but we come together joined in this great cause. And so I would now like to turn the podium over to you, Rich, to introduce our outstanding guest today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and hello, everyone. She also failed to mention that we're in this unique fraternity/sorority of people who've had just too many kids.
Between the two of us, we have 12.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, yeah. So development aid means a lot to us. You heard I'm from. My name is Rich Ashew. I am a proud member of the advisory committee here in New Hampshire, and also with BAE Systems, which is a small to moderate manufacturer here in New Hampshire. But also does a lot in both national security and in the transportation spheres. And I think this was supposed to be a 1-2 punch, the soft side and the hard side, and then when our panel comes up, the smart side. And but there is only one punch, and we all comprise it here today. And the fact of the matter is, commerce has always been an enabler, a result of, and a cause of peace. And one cannot have one without the other. And so it's crucial because the Founding Fathers, they figured this out a long time ago, that as soon as hostilities end, commerce needs to begin. And quite frankly, a significant amount of overlap between the two is what makes it all possible. So the reason why I invoke the Founders is that I found a document from 1721, and it was a report to the king about the economy of New Hampshire and how powerful it was then as an exporter. Fast forward 300 years, and it really hasn't changed. We are still an important exporter. 88% of the exports that come out of New Hampshire from small to medium businesses, $4 billion annually is exported. We are still doing our share. Now, we did our share back then for more than just the economy. We did it for freedom, because individual freedom and economic freedom go together. That is essentially the mission of the USGLC. And to explain that further, we have a video that we'd like you to view. I know what you're thinking, smart and adorable. It is a time-honored rule of public speaking to never follow smart and adorable kids on stage. But we have a panel that comes close, and I'm looking forward to introducing them to you. I'm very proud to share the stage with Katrina right now, but I'm also very proud to welcome our panelists today. They hand you these documents and it says Senator Kelly Ayotte, Senator Kelly Ayotte, Senator Kelly, and it's really hard to do that because she's Kelly to so many of us. Yet, that friend, and she's a friend to many in this room, quickly upon her election in 2010 to the U.S. Senate, distinguished herself in areas of legal justice, in areas of security, in areas of global engagement. And we're very proud of the senator she's become, and we're happy you're here to spend some time with us. I'd also like to say that she's not content to just read about things. And so it did not take her long to go visit the places that are at the crux of many of the discussions we're having here today. So Senator, welcome. We're looking forward to hearing from you. I'd also like to point out that he's back again. Governor Ridge is back again. I was in the room. I didn't get to say hi to him the last time, but when he was here before, it was hard to top your performance your last time, Governor. This is the customary time where you read the bio, but the bio's there. What I'd instead like to do is take a fairly precious moment at the podium to simply thank you for the leadership you showed this country in the wake of 9/11. It was very meaningful to all of us. We were looking for that leadership, and you delivered it, and we greatly appreciate it on behalf of New Hampshire and the country. Our panel is going to be moderated by Tiffany Eddy, and I'm here to say that I miss having dinner with Tiffany. And before you're scandalized by that, I know a lot of you miss having dinner with her too, because a lot of us did that. And I'll tell you, my wife misses having dinner with her, my kids do, because that's what we did when she was the Emmy Award-winning host of the MUR News in the evening. But now she's broken out of the chrysalis of a TV tube and is sharing her abilities in so many other ways that allow her to have lunch with us instead, and as the president of Focus First Communications, and she is going to be our moderator for the day. So ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in welcoming our panel.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rich. Very nice.
Thanks, Rich. Thank you. All right.
All right, everyone. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. It's wonderful to see you all, and we are so honored to have such distinguished guests with us, Senator Ayotte and Governor Ridge. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. We're going to have our discussion on America's role in global affairs, but about halfway through, we're going to start taking questions from the audience. So if you have a question, about halfway through, raise your hand or stand up, maybe do your best Dancing with the Stars cha-cha, and somebody from USGLC will come over. And yeah, we'd like to see the cha-chas. We have cards and we'll be judging them a little later on. So we'd like to get started with the discussion, and I would like to begin with Senator Ayotte. Excuse me. You have been one of the strongest supporters in Congress for U.S. leadership. And from ISIS to Ebola to the Ukraine, I certainly think we can all agree that there are many challenges out there. And I think many in the audience are aware that there's certainly a role for the military, and that can be a valuable tool. But what other tools are there available beyond the military? And why do you think diplomacy and development are so vital?
First of all, I'm really honored to be here. Thank you for moderating, Tiffany, and certainly with Governor Ridge. I want to thank Liz Schreier and the coalition here. This is incredibly important. When I look around this room and I see the people who are engaged in the U.S. leadership, global leadership coalition, I see a lot of movers and shakers in this state. So I'm glad that you are all here today, because this is a very important discussion. And it really starts with who we are as a country and what is America's role in the world. And very importantly, I think we need to acknowledge who we are and the significance of American engagement around the world. So not only do we have in our sort of box, our toolbox, rightly so, the greatest military on earth. And I want to thank everyone in this room, many of you who I've gotten the chance to know personally, for your service. But if you ask our military leaders what is one of the most important tools that they have that helps them with what they do to avoid conflict, they will tell you that is our engagement, our diplomatic engagement, our economic engagement. And why does it matter? I mean, it matters in terms of, number one, our security, because if we're able to engage diplomatically and establish relationships with countries around the world, friendships, and also friendships when we have to confront mutual enemies of people that will work with us, then we're able to avoid conflict, and we are less likely to have to send our great military in to use force. And so it matters, number one, with security. Second, as has been talked about today, is our economic strength. The economic strength of America does require us to engage in global trade. It requires us to be able to engage and be part of new markets. And if there isn't security, we can't do that. And frankly, we can't enjoy the freedoms that we have here. And finally, who are we? What do we stand for? As a democracy, human rights, our Bill of Rights, what are the basic values that define America? Well, those basic values matter in terms of not just how we treat our own citizens, but also as a leader in the world, how we are engaging on human rights issues around the world. So if it's a case like, for example, where we had Miriam Ibrahim with connections here, who's now living in New Hampshire, who is imprisoned because she won't renounce her religion and is actually forced to have her baby in prison, why does it matter to us? It matters to us because if we don't uphold our values around the world and act as a leader around the world, frankly, the world is less safe, there's less freedom, there's less economic development. And so it's not just our hard power. What we're here today is to talk about our tools, and that requires, I think they work hand in hand, by the way. If we aren't prepared to support our military and our hard power, then when we engage diplomatically, we don't have the strength of having countries that are willing to understand that we're serious about things we say, that when we say something we mean it, that when we do engage with you, that we'll engage with you economically, that we'll partner with you and help you where we need to help you with all the tools that are in our toolbox. And so it all comes together, and what made me the biggest fan of this as thinking about us engaging around the world and our soft power was really what I heard from our military leaders, because they themselves will say this is one of the most important things that we can do to work hand in hand with the military to avoid conflict around the world and to keep this country safe. And in New Hampshire, we have the opportunity for a unique role, I think, in the presidential primary of asking people, what do you believe America's role is in the world? How do you define our values, and how does that relate to how we're going to engage around the world and what we're going to do? And what type of leadership will you bring, not just in terms of supporting our military, which is absolutely foremost, but also in terms of how you think you will bring the strength of diplomacy and the strength of building friendships and allies that trust the relationships in the United States of America.
Thank you, Senator Ayer. And obviously you're very passionate about this subject, and it speaks to the fact that this is who we are as Americans and as Granite Staters, but also economically it makes sense in that when you think about the fact that 10 out of our 15 top trading partners right now are countries that at one point we offered development or security assistance to. So it seems like it's an obvious thing that we should be doing, but why is it so hard to convince people that it's important when you think about the fact that foreign aid in the U.S. budget is just 1% of our budget? So why is it difficult to get people on board and politicians on board to support this cause?
Well, first of all, I want to put an exclamation point on my gratitude and thanks as the Senator did to each and every one of you. Liz, phenomenal. That little video with those young people reminded me of a statement attributed to Native Americans. It says, you don't inherit the earth from your ancestors, you borrow it from your kids. Think about that one. It's a good one. So you have a responsibility today, our generation, to make sure that those kids live in at least as good, if not a better world. And I must say, I'm not sure we're doing a very good job right now. And part of that, and this is a sequel into your wonderful question, is that this is an issue that is very easy to demagogue. Foreign aid is an issue very easy to demagogue. And probably next to executive compensation is something that politicians like to beat up on the most. You know, we have all these challenges and problems in the United States. How dare we, or why should we, and blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, we should be supporting it because it's in our economic, military, national security, and strategic interest to do so. It's a strategic play. And it's all right for America to act in its own best interest, but it's best when we act in our interest when it's consistent with our brand. And what is our brand? Our brand is a value system that the Senator related to and you know full well. It's about that compassionate side of the United States. It's about that preemptive efforts that we undertake in many, many ways to help others. It's that notion of rising tide lifts all boats. Oh, absolutely. 7 out of the 10 of the leading markets are in emerging markets or in Africa. Do we have a strategic interest in that part of the world? Yes, we do. Will it advance our interest to tie ourselves economically and from a humanitarian point of view and a public health point of view to that part of the world? Yes, it will. We can advance mutual interests because America in the 21st century, in my opinion, and you're going to have a lot to say about the leadership of this country in about 2 years. And I do hope you ask these presidential candidates, should America be more engaged or less engaged in the 21st century around the world? And anybody that says that we should be less engaged, I'd have to pause and think about it. As the world shrinks because of technology, transportation, its finance, et cetera, I would suggest that we need to be more engaged, not less. So you got some political isolationists and you got some economic isolationists. 21st century, we cannot afford to be an isolationist. So I think the challenge we have is convincing policymakers that 1% of the budget directed toward preemptive action, not reactive action, building healthcare systems, building roads, building schools, is in our best economic interest. It advances our brand, and at the end of the day, it probably has, and that's why the military is so supportive of global leadership. They'd much rather send aid than soldiers. I'll give you just an anecdote. Think what Petraeus and McChrystal were able to do, and this is just a bit of history, but Anbar province right now is a mess, and we're not going to get into that. That's not the purpose of this discussion. But he was able to consolidate a lot of support from various tribes and the Sunnis there because even though our military isn't into nation building, they did bring in some Corps of Engineers, and they dug wells. They built some roads. They put up some schools. And all of a sudden, these tribal chiefs and these elders had an infrastructure that was theirs, and they were willing to fight to protect it. So did we advance the humanitarian interest and a human interest by helping them? Yes. Did we support our military by doing it? Yes. Did we advance, more importantly, our brand? You know, we stamp USA when we show up for the tsunami in Thailand, and we responded to Fukushima Daiichi, and we responded quickly to Haiti. Well, that's after the crisis. This 1% gives us an opportunity to be a little bit ahead of the crisis in advancing our economic interest, our strategic interest, and I couldn't agree with the senator more. And frankly, I'm grateful that she's one of the few senators in that body that is paying attention to the world, to America's engagement in the rest of the world, and doesn't shy away from this tough issue. But when you advance the brand, we advance our our national security and economic interest, and that's a trifecta I'd bet on every day. And
I would also add, Governor Ridge has said this so well, but the reality is if the answer is that you're for less engagement, I think as we look at the challenges we face around the world right now, less engagement means more conflict. And so that's something we have to think about. As much as we would like to, that there's a natural feeling, I think people say, to pull back in yourselves. We understand that natural feeling. But if you look at the challenges we face, if you look at even what someone like Governor Ridge had to deal with the attack on our country, the lack of engagement is one where it eventually comes back here. And we can either engage with it and try to prevent things that happening and build relationships that strengthen us not only in terms of security, but also in terms of our economy, or we can sit here and wait for things to react to us. And so I would argue that the answer to that would be we don't want that to happen. We want to ensure that there's less conflict.
one more observation.
Oh, yeah,
because,
sure.
You're in charge, so I got to ask permission.
Well, I'll defer to you on this one.
The other quick anecdote that I like to bring up, and it may seem like ancient history, but I served with an individual by the name of Charlie Wilson, and I don't know if you ever saw the movie Charlie Wilson's War. But remember, we spent quite a bit of money supporting then the Mujahideen in order to get Russia. There was in the middle of the Cold War, we moved it out. But there's a scene at the end of the movie that I think is very telling and really right on point. At the end, he goes back into the Intelligence Committee and asks for several $1 million to build roads and schools and wells. And one of the members of the Intelligence Committee says, "Who do you think you are, the congressman from Kabul?" And he didn't get it. Now, I'm not saying that you rewrite history in that region, but there was a vacuum there. Who filled the vacuum? The Taliban. And so if you think, what would have happened if America would have been a lot more aggressive to begin developing and taking that approach that Petraeus took in Anbar province and elsewhere, help build an infrastructure that is good for them, reflects our values, and gives them something worth fighting for. And really the first notion of freedom and independence that you have is when you suddenly start building this little infrastructure that's yours. So at the end of the day, I think that is one of the most, and that, of all that, in that movie, that's the most powerful scene. Preemptive aid. Think about Lebanon. We finally got split the parties apart in Lebanon. What happened when we didn't go in and help the Lebanese government? They elected a democracy. We gave them a few $1 million. We weren't paying too much attention to them. Hezbollah moved in. So you can't say, and I can't tell you that but for that aid, it might be different in the Middle East or it might be different in Afghanistan. But I sure wish we could have given it a try, because nature abhors a vacuum, so does politics. And if we're in there preemptively with aid, advancing the human cause, raising the human condition, helping them take care of their families, there's a vested emotional commitment you get because America does that. We're really good after the disaster. One of the things this 1% does is gives us an opportunity in before potentially a geopolitical disaster or geopolitical problem emerges. I'll never forget that scene in Charlie Wilson's War. I did know him. He was quite the character, but that scene was, I think, very prescient in terms of what might have happened had we been willing to follow his lead.
We win the war, but not always the peace.
Amen.
And I think also as we look at places that we're engaged in, it's how we leave places too. It's not, going there is obviously important, and when we go there, we need to make those decisions very carefully when we're involved in conflict and very thoughtfully. But how we leave matters very much too, because otherwise you find yourself back in a pattern where you're dealing with unleft situations that, as the governor has rightly said, you have a vacuum that gets filled in a way that doesn't meet our interests and creates further conflict.
I think also it's important to remember that what happens across the world can have an impact right here on New Hampshire. And Senator Ayotte, you've been spectacular going out and supporting small businesses here in New Hampshire. And I believe there's about 285,000 people right now who work for a small business in New Hampshire. So it's a huge part of our economy. And there's a wonderful success story. It's a Concord-based company, Boyle Energy, which I think you visited, you're familiar with. But 10 years ago, their exports accounted for about 5% of their sales, and today it's nearly 90% of their sales. And they were able to work with the Export-Import Bank to arrange a partnership. So just want to discuss, and also today, wonderful success story. They've gone from 5 employees to 50 employees, and with plans to still grow. And that's just one company here in New Hampshire. So can we discuss just what these partnerships can mean, and how do we help facilitate them?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, as you look at the economy in New Hampshire, exports are just tremendously important to our economy, and there are great opportunities for our business. We've seen great growth in the export area, and New Hampshire's not unique on that, but we've really seen some significant growth here. And if you look at a company like Boyle Energy, there has been a financing vehicle that we've had available, the Export-Import Bank, this issue, it's been extended, the bank's authorization until June, and this is something we have to take up again in the Congress. If you look at the impact of that bank, number one, so why do we have it? I think there's been an argument made that we shouldn't, that this is not the proper role of government, that we shouldn't have it. Well, we need to understand that we're competing around the world with countries that have much greater and larger export and import financing entities than our Export-Import Bank. And so we can decide to tie our companies' hands when it comes to exports behind one hand behind the back and compete against these countries in that way. As I looked at this and analyzed the Export-Import Bank, it's returned over $3 billion to the Treasury. I just wish that for every federal agency, that I could have the analysis of does it return money to the Treasury, because then it would be a lot easier as we look at the fiscal challenges facing our country. So in New Hampshire, the impact of this in extending it, which I look forward to supporting, is important because since 2007, $356 million of financing has been done through the Export-Import Bank in New Hampshire with 34 different companies. One of them is Boyle Energy, which has seen tremendous growth in the number of employees. So this is a common sense measure where if no other country had this type of financing vehicle, that might be one thing, but we will put ourselves at a competitive disadvantage if we don't extend this. And also, if you look at the default rate for the Export-Import Bank, it's actually lower than commercial entities. So here we have an entity that returns money to the taxpayers, has a lower default rate, helps create jobs here in New Hampshire. And so this is something that just makes sense where we should be looking at. This gives our companies an opportunity to get financing that they can't always get through the commercial sector, and that's why it's important. The other thing I'd like to talk about as we think about opportunities in New Hampshire and throughout the country is also our engagement on trade. That is negotiating trade agreements that are important for our country to reduce tariffs of some of the countries that we are paying tariffs on. Right now there's negotiations ongoing with Europe. There's negotiations ongoing with Asia. And I firmly believe that the president needs trade promotion authority to be able to continue to negotiate these types of agreements so that we when we're engaging with trade with another country, our companies aren't disadvantaged by the tariffs that they pay, so that we have free and open trade that benefits our companies and they can expand their opportunities. So that's another thing I think that we need to do more of. And I wish the president would ask for trade promotion authority because his predecessors have, and it's been important to engage us internationally. So those are two things that I think impact this. But without security and without just engagement on the diplomatic level, you can't ask our companies to go and engage in these exports. So all of this relates in terms of security, in terms of diplomatic engagement, because our companies that want to sell to customers outside of New Hampshire have to be able to know that they're in an environment where they can securely do business.
I think one more just a point supporting what you just said is preparing for this. Some of the stats that I was learning about is USAID for every dollar that's invested, $75 come back in trade. So trade's really critical to our economy. Governor Ridge, as as governor of Pennsylvania, you led many trade delegations overseas. How were you able to convince people that they were important, and what did you learn from them?
Well, thank you very much. Yes, we did. We built out an infrastructure with our state from 2 to about 8 regional offices. You wouldn't be surprised to learn that we put the people that we hired on a performance-based contracts. So if you're going to be working for Pennsylvania, we want to see results. But we didn't take the iconic companies with me. We took the companies that the senator's talking about. We took the small and medium-sized companies with us. And we told them, forget trying to make a sale. Develop a relationship so that you've got an ongoing partner. You've got something to offer them. They've got something to offer you. And again, it's consistent with my theory that it was good for business, but in the long run, it was good for Pennsylvania and it was good for America. And so we really focused on small business, but the senator raises a very important issue as well, and that's Export-Import Bank, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. These are entities that would come under the gun and scrutiny of those who say, well, it's not exactly the marketplace and I'm a free market person and blah, blah. Folks, it is very, very competitive to build relationships around the world if you're a nation state. The Chinese right now are the best. They go in with aid, they go in with loans. And I'm not saying we're going to quite replicate their model because oftentimes the loans and aids are directed toward hiring just their companies and they bring in labor. But the fact of the matter is, I think it was the McKinsey Global Institute said that by 2030, there'll be over $50 trillion worth, I said that right, $50 trillion worth of infrastructure projects around the world. And what the infrastructure projects are, their roads and their bridges and their schools and their water systems, purification systems and distribution systems. So is it in our interest to support our companies, large and small, to compete? Yes. But the competitive field is, frankly, it's tilted against us because for policy reasons and political reasons, we don't see the value added to organizations like XM and OPEC, and they're moderately funded. Now, the first thing that the Global Leadership Group is trying to say is, don't cut us anymore. But the fact of the matter, we fall woefully short in terms of access to capital to compete in a very aggressive international marketplace for these kinds of opportunities, which lend themselves to jobs here, quality overseas, and we advance the brand. Now, if you take a look at some of the experience of some of our competitors, even though they have a better loan portfolio and they just do things a little differently, than it still comes down to quality. And some of our biggest competitors have been kicked out of countries because the quality isn't as good. And frankly, some of the social and humanitarian repercussions and consequences of their presence in a particular country hasn't been well received by that country. So at the end of the day, it takes a lot of courage in this day and age to support XM and OPEC, and we congratulate your senator for doing that. The other area where I think we fall woefully short is the State Department in terms of the consular offices. The one thing I found out as governor when we went to these trade missions, and we did several, we're always very successful. We have people we had arrangements for people to get in and see and do meaningful work. It was not a pleasure trip. They varied. But at every embassy, they could always use a few more economic affairs officer, everyone. There's intelligence to be gathered at the local level, to be shared back with the private sector, to be shared with the small business community of New Hampshire. And so at the end of the day, when you think about maintaining 1% of this massive budget in order to advance our cause, our economic cause, our national security cause, and advance our brand, it's a small price to pay. And it's, again, in the 21st century, we need to be more engaged in the world, not less engaged.
You know, what's interesting about the budget is many Americans believe that our foreign aid is about 20-25% of the federal budget. And the Pew Research Group, they just had a poll that found that number is actually higher, that most Americans or many Americans believe that it's a third of our budget. So why is there such a misperception out there? How do we fix that?
Well, first of all, you know, when I have town halls in New Hampshire, this is a question I get actually quite often. And one of the things that I try to do is just do a pie chart of where do our federal dollars get spent. But there is a misperception that the foreign aid budget is so much larger than 1%. And I think it's just informing people. And there's no question in my mind that there's always ways we can do better with our foreign aid. I mean, I've had several pieces of legislation that I think that our State Department can use, that our military and others can use to have better contract with the right people and make sure that our dollars are being used very wisely. But that said, there is a misperception out there, and I think it's just informing people and everyone in this room, not just on the issue of foreign aid, but to engage the public on where we are spending our money and where are our fiscal challenges as we think about trying to address $17 trillion in debt. Where are the main drivers of our debt? And I can assure you it's not foreign aid. We could cut that tomorrow altogether and we would still be in a huge, huge financial situation. And so I think that that's just a matter of leadership. And what I would very much like to see, I don't know if I'll ever see it, but I'd love to see a president actually go on and explain to the American people, you know, where are we spending our money, and here's where our biggest challenges are, because I think your average American isn't exposed to it. And I'll be lucky, you know, the number of people that show up in a town hall, but we need to get that word out more, because we're not going to get people engaged. We're not here to talk fix the debt today. But if we were to talk fix the debt, we're not going to get people engaged on that issue either until they know what are the biggest drivers of the debt as we look at it and the challenges we face.
It's so easy to demagogue the issue. I mean, it is so easy to demagogue foreign aid. But the ROI, the return on investment of foreign aid, I mean, the Senator just pointed out, how much did the Ex-Im Bank return to the Treasury?
$3.4 billion.
And the number of jobs that are created because of that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think one of the challenges is that some people, people such as yourselves, interested citizens and business leaders, have to hold those who spew out this demagogic rhetoric relative to foreign aid, have to hold them accountable, because it's just not accurate. And at the end of the day, I would say to them, would you rather send a few dollars in foreign aid, or do you want your son and your best friend's son going over someplace else with an M16 or an AR-15? I mean, it's not that you're going to avoid wars in the future or avoid the need for military action in parts of the world, but we are at our best, in my judgment. America is at its best when it's promoting, as the Senator said at the outset, promoting our value system, promoting our brand. And whether we like it or not, ladies and gentlemen, there is an expectation that we do things globally consistent with our brand. And we ought to be proud of that, because we are held to a threshold and a standard that's higher than any other country in the world. And when we go out and do those kinds of things around foreign aid, working with NGOs, improving public health systems, digging wells, providing support, it is consistent with our brand, and it's who we are as a country, and there's a certain expectation, and we should be proud that we're expected to do that, because we don't do it because there's an advantage to us, but at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, there's enormous goodwill. In a world as chaotic as it is today, goodwill is very important, directed toward us, our soldiers, our diplomats, and our citizens.
So well said, and there is no substitute for American leadership and who we are as a country. We are, in my view, the greatest country on earth. And if that's the case, then we need to act like that. We can't pretend we're someone else, because we aren't. And when we do, there's vacuums created around the world that make all of us less safe and provide less opportunity for our citizens.
Katrina, your dad talked about it on the floor. I was proud to serve with your dad when I was a young congressman. But you know, there's certain congressmen who talk about everything on the floor and they get tuned out. But when your dad used to take the floor and talk about justice and humanitarian and America's value system and why we ought to be engaged, you'd hear a pin drop. Because you could just hear a pin drop, and that really projects what I think ours and D's. Forget about politics. We are one country, one nation, under God, we have a value system, and this is a unique way for us in a bipartisan way to promote it.
And I think we feel good when we're doing that too.
Yeah.
We know that it's the right thing to do. So I guess my next question would be for both of you, but how do civic and faith-based organizations get involved and work with the government to help overseas, to make a difference?
Well, I personally believe that there have been some, look, when people try to demagogue foreign aid, they'll talk about abuses of certain expenditures. What they don't talk about is that when you channel those dollars toward a specific objective through an NGO or a faith-based organization, you don't have to worry about that. I mean, we give money directly to a country, yeah, that's wide open, that's open territory for malfeasance, misfeasance, and just bad conduct from time to time, and we know that. But normally, I think if you take a look at the history of aid flowing through faith-based organizations and NGOs, you'll find that it is well-directed, overseen, and the outcomes, and that's what we're interested in, outcomes are laudable and praiseworthy.
And I would also say, you know, the fact that you've seen the number of private corporations and companies that are supporting this effort, there's such an important role for that public-private partnership, that using that 1% to leverage what the business community is doing and engaging, and the philanthropic charitable community, whether it's the One campaign, whether it's the Gates Foundation, the number of foundations that are investing and frankly putting forward best practices for, as the governor said, making sure if you're putting funds in a situation where it's an NGO, where they're accountable for the funds, where there have to be metrics, where results matter, as opposed to sometimes having to engage with countries where you have less reliable partnership and less accountability.
All right, well, thank you both. We're at that part now where we get to go to the audience and ask the audience to help with questions. So if anyone has a question, thank you, sir. Please raise your hand and we'll have a microphone go over. And if you wouldn't mind just saying your name and where you're from and then who your question's directed towards.
Jack Gilchrist. I run a small manufacturing company in Hudson, New Hampshire, and most of my exports are done to the state of Massachusetts, but
That's like its own country sometimes.
it's still like another country. But as leaders, I think we may all agree that leaders demand loyalty and earn respect. But the people that we lead also demand or require an equal amount of loyalty in return. It seems like we've had an erosion in loyalty or staying the course to those places around the world that we have tried to market our brand to, but I don't think that we're necessarily that loyal to our own brand, maybe because politics, whatever. But anything, do you have any thoughts on that or solutions to that?
Well, Jack, you know, I have to say that like any relationship, you have to be able to rely on your allies, your friends, and you have to know that if you say something, that you're going to follow through on it. And that means whether it's leadership at the presidential level, leadership in terms of Congress and relationships that we've had. So whether it's long-term friendships like Israel as reliable partners in the Middle East, as we look around the world at the challenges we face, that to me is incredibly important. And one of the things that troubles me about where we are right now is if you do any level of traveling, you will hear a similar story from many of our allies that they feel that there's ambivalence from our country. They feel that they don't know whether they can count on us. And so it's very hard if that's where the relationship is when you have to build a coalition, for example, to fight a terrorist group like ISIS, to bring everyone together. And so I'm really worried about that right now. I think we need stronger leadership. I do think that there is a perception out there among our allies and friends that we haven't been able to be counted on. And we have to end that perception, because otherwise we're not going to bring people together to do the things that need to be done, nor to have those relationships that matter in terms of our economic strength and our security.
Any other questions? Don't be shy. Okay, you, sir. And we'll get a microphone to you, I think, in just a second. You're sort of trapped in over there in your own peninsula.
Thank you. Mark Sykes from Kittery. We spoke about a lot of the trouble areas that we have in the world that have been created by the vacuum of us withdrawing from the world in so many ways. At the same time, if we were meeting a year ago and you'd polled the audience to see what our biggest foreign concern was, the answer probably would have been Iran. And it's been swept from the news by all these other things that are going on. And we are, in fact, through our efforts to seize their economy and stop them from interacting with the world, we are isolating them or endeavoring to do so from the world. And as we come up on, in about a month, our hopefully successful treaty conclusion with them, it seems to me that we got to the leadership of Iran through the successful sanctions by hurting the people. And so we've really done the opposite of everything you've been talking about, what we're trying or should be trying to do with the rest of the world. So my question is, what can we do now and going forward to try to reverse the damage that we've done, albeit in a good cause, but nevertheless to the very people that we ought to be reaching out to?
Well, I'm going to defer to the senator because she probably has more timely and more inside information about Iran. I'm going to respectfully disagree with the notion that our policy toward Iran has been counterproductive. Iran is a terrorist theocracy. The tentacles of Iran reach into Assad, reach into Hezbollah, reach into the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, reach into Hamas. Has had more control in Baghdad after we spent $1 trillion and lost 4,000 men and women. The mullahs have had Maliki like a puppet, and our State Department's kind of ignored it. So I think, again, it's Tom Ridge's opinion that when President Bush said that they were the axis of evil included Iran, I think he was probably more prescient than even he thought. I would agree with you from time to time that sometimes sanctions do end up hurting those you're least inclined to hurt. But I think given the repercussions of a nuclear Iran, which is the #1 terrorist state in the world, and is the #1 terrorist bank in the world, I think we had to, we understand that it's probably causing a little bit of some difficulty within the economy and maybe impacting some of the individual citizens. But Persia, Iran is a great culture. They're wonderful people. They're sophisticated traders. And yet you don't notice, you never get any report of what's going on in Iran with regard to the assassination, the murders, the imprisonment of political prisoners, because there is no free press in Iran. Rouhani will grant some interviews to the Western press, and all of a sudden you got the Washington Post and the New York Times saying that he's a moderate, but they don't tell you about the people they hang with cranes. They don't tell people about the people they imprison. So I understand your point of view, and conceptually I am appreciative of it and have some empathy. You don't want to impose sanctions when it ends up hurting the men and women and the families there. But in this instance, I frankly don't think we've been tough enough. And they've created a problem for us in Iraq that I'm not sure from which we can recover. That's my view.
Well, I very much agree with what Governor Ridge has said. First of all, as you look at the situation with Iran, what I'm worried about is as we're thinking about addressing ISIS, as we think about the challenges that Vladimir Putin presents to us, that this agreement with Iran that is being negotiated, that I'm worried that it won't be one that actually will hold up in terms of ensuring that we end their march towards nuclear weapons. And why does this matter? Because as the governor has said, this is the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. We cannot afford to have Iran have a nuclear weapon. We're the great Satan. They would like to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, but they've also been very engaged, even in terrorist activities on our own soil. And so this is important that we do whatever we can to stop. And we always have to be cognizant of, when we're imposing sanctions, what the impact is on the people. But that said, the economic sanctions that we put in place, which I agree, frankly, I think we need to be tougher on Iran right now, is what brought them to the negotiation table. They would have never come to the negotiation table had we not imposed those sanctions, working with our international partners to even discuss ending their nuclear program. So I think that we have to look at all the tools in our toolbox. Economic sanctions are preferable to having to use military hardware to end, for example, a nuclear weapons program that threatens us and the world. And so that's why it was important that we do it. Where I think we could have stood more with the people of Iran is during the Green Revolution, when they took to the streets in Iran, and they were fighting and talking about the things that the governor referenced in terms of their oppression in Iran, and their inability to have a voice in their government, the values that we stand for, going to those values, human rights in Iran. And we should have been a much louder voice then from the highest levels of our government.
To the Senator's point, remember there was an Arab Spring? There was a Persian Spring, but you never knew about it. There could have been a Persian Spring. It's a wonderful country. The people are phenomenal. I think if you did a survey there, you'd find the majority of the people would love to be more connected with the United States, but it's pretty difficult for them to express their point of view when the mullahs are controlling everything.
Yeah,
so
they're being oppressed.
they're a very oppressed
people.
society.
And the suppression of women, too. We have another question over here.
Yeah, good.
Sir?
Hi, my name's Robert Sedgwick. I'm with the Dartmouth Graduate Veterans Association. My question is based on the concept of development and its role in preventing these upstarts and these groups. Currently, we're saying ISIS. 3 months ago, we were talking Boko Haram with the schoolgirls that were taken captive. Before we could bring it back to Al-Qaeda, Taliban. What role is this development process playing to prevent another group later on? We can battle ISIS now. We can take whatever military action. But you can take them, the military goes in, handles the situation. At what point does development take over and prevent the military ever having to go in there?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, it's a wonderful question, and I don't think we ought to view development assistance and foreign aid as the only answer to the complicated problem that you raised with your question. We're talking about, but I think it has a critical role. Because if we look back after 2001, and I was very much a part of that, we called it a war on terror. Well, terrorism is a tactic. You don't wage war against the tactic. Your enemy uses the tactic against you. It's really a war against the belief system. And in that belief system, there is nothing to advance the human condition and the interest of any Muslim, anybody that practices the faith. I mean, matter of fact, these terrorists have killed more of their kind than not, more of those who embrace Islam and Muslim. So where development assistance comes in, I think, is, again, it's consistent with the brand and what we try to promote as Americans about improving, reaching out and trying to address the human needs that I think are harbored in the heart, in the soul, in the of everyone, regardless of where they live, unless they've been tainted by this toxic embrace of the ideology. And what is that? What is that? I've got a family. I don't want them to be sick. I want them to be healthy. I've got a family. I don't want them to be hungry. I want them to be fed. I have a family. I don't want them to be illiterate. I like them to be educated. And those who embrace that ideology aren't interested in any of those things. So it is not exactly the answer. There's other things we have to do, and it may be have to throw in special forces, and you'd have to be a lot stronger diplomatically and a lot of other things. But at the end of the day, what does our development assistance do in contrast to the toxic ideology and these radicals, Islamic radicals have thrown at it? It's not about improving their lives, their human condition. So it has a role. I like my family to have a shelter. I like them to be well fed. I love for them to be healthy. I love them to be educated. You may dispute this, but I have a tough time believing anybody, regardless of where they live, and no matter how impoverished they are, they don't seek that for themselves and their family and their community. And to that extent, that's why development assistance plays such an important role in terms of our foreign policy.
All right, we have a few more questions. We have hands waving. Okay, we've got a vigorous one back there.
One.
Hi, my name is Susan Pillsbury, and I'm with the One campaign. And I wanted to ask you how your feelings about the Energize Africa Act of 2014. I'd like you to speak about that, Senator Ayotte, if you would. There are a number of, we were able to, the House passed an equivalent bill, a similar bill, and I'm wondering, with all these wonderful things that are being said, how you feel about it, one, and two would be if you'd be willing to become a co-sponsor. Thank you.
No pressure.
I don't even know the question.
I'm going to have to look at it more closely. But I'm very supportive of what the One campaign is doing, and I'll follow up with you. I like to read through things, and I haven't read that yet, so I will. And the other issue that I will say is, I think you're a great example of how there are these public-private partnerships there. And also, if you look at some of the efforts that we've done in Africa in terms of under President Bush and also PEPFAR and some of the things we've done to address AIDS, and now with our role, if you look at Africa as someplace that, with the challenges we're facing with Ebola, but also this is an area where if we don't engage, we see the issue of a public health crisis, but we also know that the rise of terrorist groups in Africa, as the governor referenced and the student rightly asked about over there, but also the economic opportunities in Africa, because the Chinese are all in Africa. They're very, very engaged. And so I will take a very careful look at that legislation, and I will get back to you directly. But I'm a firm believer that we can't afford not to be engaged in Africa, given what we're seeing in terms of security, health challenges right now, but also economic opportunities there that are critical for this country.
I didn't quite hear your question, but this may be one off, but you alluded to a public-private partnership. I'm privileged to serve on the board of Hershey's Chocolate. Hope you all like chocolate. They're big in North Africa, and they're big in Africa in two countries. Deal with the issue of child farm labor. There are a lot of issues there. And they've taken it upon, and here's where I think when an American company embraces its corporate responsibility and acts in that country, not only to further its interests, but to help the people with whom and the communities with whom they're dealing build an infrastructure to make them a better place to live and to work and raise their families. They've done that. I mean, just a modest program, not modest, where we went out and they distributed cell phones to some of these rural farmers so they can contact each other. They can share information. And we're part of a process where we can talk about how you can do more with the land you have, the kind of fertilizers you need, with the pricing. And so it's just a modest example, but that's one of the reasons where you want to have Americans, and they did this without any development, any foreign aid of any kind, but you want American companies. Frankly, I can make an argument that an American company acting consistent with the American brand and embracing its social responsibility to the people in the region. Of course, you're going to make a product, but embracing that social responsibility can have as much impact as anything that anybody else could do. And that's where that public-private partnership, particularly around development assistance, is very, very important.
It's the right thing to do. In developing countries, their economies are growing 3 times faster than countries that are already developed. So it's important to remember that beyond humanitarian, it's also good for the economy as well, if I may interject. Yes, you, sir, in the back.
Tom Blonsky, Catholic Charities. In regards to the burgeoning Ebola outbreak, what would you do working with African countries to develop a stronger health infrastructure? Certainly if you were governor back at Homeland Security.
Well, it's an interesting question. You know, obviously these are countries that don't have a public health system. The infrastructure is rather poor. I do think it's important that we send people over to help build some facilities and from some clinics. The debate is rather engaged right now as whether or not we close the borders. I think it's a pretty difficult thing to do. It may symbolically mean a lot. Whether or not it helps you contain the spread of this remains to be seen. I think the answer is really for the broader global community, particularly the healthcare community, led by probably CDC, which is probably the best in the world, to answer the pleas of some of these country leaders and get as much staffing and as much equipment over there to try to contain it. There is a strategy around containment that has worked, but right now it doesn't appear to be very successfully implemented by those countries. And so I think the best thing, and again, it would not necessarily be in Homeland Security's purview, would be in the White House and CDC and Health and Human Services. But I think there is a protocol that they are beginning to establish. It's not completely implemented yet. And I think that's the most important, the best thing we could do. In addition to using some diplomatic efforts and getting some of the other African countries in the region to participate in responding to the healthcare crisis by sending in some of their own healthcare workers. I mean, there's a role for us, but there's also a broader role for us to lead the international health community, the World Health Organization. And right now it looks like we're doing most of the heavy lifting, and I think it's part of our diplomatic effort, which is the smart power to get more of the African countries involved in there as well. Much more to say to that. It's
I think that also, the United Nations, they were, I think, a little late to this game too in getting them more engaged. They have an important role there in terms of public health issues, and that means that we're doing what we can to provide that support there so that we can contain and have proper practices so that this doesn't spread any further. Another example of why we couldn't ignore it is one thing to say, boy, it'd be nice if we could leave that, but if we were not to engage right now over there, then this thing could spread further because best practices aren't in place. Yeah. You've got a situation where it becomes much more dangerous. And then also saying, partners, this is an issue for the world. Yeah. Europe, everyone needs to be helping on this and really working with us and with the partners that Governor Ridge referenced, the other African countries, to contain it. And we're researching a cure. And that's an example. There were some in Congress before I served there that had the foresight to actually designate some resources to start looking for a cure for this. And we don't have one yet. But had there not been some foresight there on a bipartisan basis, we wouldn't have even been started in that process.
If I might, just one other comment. It's a wonderful question. Just assume for a moment that before the Ebola virus, you had, the senator had to vote on an appropriation, some of which was to send money to these 3 or 4 countries or to Africa generally to build up their public health system. Oh, what are you doing trying to help them build up their public health system? We got a problem in the United States in spite of the fact that we got the best medical health care delivery system in the world. And now people would say, that's probably not a bad idea. Because it is a global, the global connectivity. That's why you have to be more engaged in the world, not less engaged.
Good example, well put. We're almost out of time, unfortunately, so I just want to give our 2 panelists the opportunity to just sum up why we're all here together and where we go moving forward. Senator Ayotte?
Well, I think why we're here together is that this all very much matters. It matters. America's role in the world matters in terms of our security here, our economic strength, and whether we stand up for our values, whether it's someone like Miriam Ibrahim and standing up for her and her fight for religious freedom, whether it's many other examples that we have around the world where people are imprisoned for what they believe in, and which is antithetical to our values. But most of all, thinking about without strong American engaged leadership, then we see the unraveling around the world. We see that the vacuums are created where we then have to send our military places where we wouldn't want to send them. And so we want to take the proactive steps up front, whether it's engagement through our foreign aid budget, it's working together to leverage that with the private partners and the foundations that are working on that, so that hopefully we, through our strength, as Ronald Reagan said, peace through strength, that strength is our military, but that strength is also what is America's voice in the world. And that's part of our strength too. And so that's why I think we're all here today, and this is why it matters to us, and making sure that America remains safe and strong, and that if we want to all hide in our closets, unfortunately, the terrorists will still be out there. The people who want to undermine our values will still be out there, and we just can't do that. And so I'm so glad to see so many leaders in this room who are here to be part of this today. I'm very, very honored to be here with Governor Ridge, who's just a tremendous leader, not only as a governor, but as our Secretary of Homeland Security. I want to thank Tiffany for being an excellent moderator, and thank the college, St. A's. Thank you, President DeSalvo, for your leadership, and for the college hosting so many important discussions like this to really bring people together to talk about this important issue that often is just too reflected in sound bites rather than a more in-depth discussion like we've had today. Thank you.
America has never sent out, Shimon Peres said, America is great not for what it takes, but for what it gives. It's a great thought. And what we have given or provided to the broader global community for a long, long time has been leadership. And that leadership to affect challenges associated with the broader global community has pretty much been defaulted to us probably since World War I. And I think as Americans, we should take some pride with that notion that there's an expectation that our allies and our friends and our enemies and those that oppose us want to know what America's doing. They don't want to know where you stand. They want to know if you're as good as your word. And for that reason, when you think of the three prongs of how you affect events around the world, and you do so because it's the right thing to do, but you also do so because it's America's interest that it be done that way. Ronald Reagan, as Margaret Thatcher said, Ronald Reagan won the Cold War without firing a shot. It's called peace through strength. Makes a lot of sense now, even more perhaps than it did before. If you say something, if you draw a line in the sand, you got to back it up, else you start losing your credibility. Diplomacy is one of the, remember, our diplomats used to be the admiral or the captain of the boat when it got into the port. It's not anymore. We have a State Department, we've got embassies, we've got staff. We need to bolster them up, and I think, frankly, we could probably use a little bit more effective diplomacy out there. And I'm not casting aspersions or negative comments to anybody, but we have to understand that diplomacy is very much one of the tools of the trade. But the diplomats can only be as good as you got to have a strong military behind you. And right now, there's some questions as to whether or not those two are balanced. And then that third leg of the stool, that's the foreign aid, that's the developmental assistance. And you think of that, you think in terms of who we are and advancing our brand, but again, once again, that's in our interest. And one of the beautiful things about the global leadership, and while I'm proud to serve as a co-chairman with Madeleine Albright, a great American, great patriot, and a great Secretary of State, is that we see the value of all three. But more importantly, we see the connectedness. Because at the end of the day, if they're executed correctly, from the foreign aid and developmental assistance, aggressive, focused, effective diplomacy, and peace through strength, you can influence events in a very positive way, not always, but in a very positive way in the rest of the world. A rising tide does lift all boats. And peace does generate the kind of thinking that we'd like to think. You know, democracies don't normally declare war on democracies. So at the end of the day, the fact that I'm associated and the Senator's associated, and thank you very much for your moderation with the global leadership, something I'm very proud of. because it's that three-legged stool. We need all of them to work in harmony with one another. And both right now seem to be challenged. And when you have presidential candidates coming through here over the next couple of months, next couple of years, and they're probably going to start November 5th. You're going to be invited to a lot of these. Just make sure that they understand that you need all three of them in order for America to affect the events around the rest of the world, not only because it's the right thing to do, it's in our interest to do it. Thank you very much.
My name is Carl Beckstein. I'm the USGLC's New Hampshire Outreach Manager. And first off, I would like to thank our speakers today, in particular Senator Ayotte for being such a strong champion and leader for keeping America strong, safe, and a leader in the world. We truly appreciate you being with us here today, and we really appreciate your support and look forward to working with you more in the future. Governor Ridge, we appreciate you being here as well, and thank you, Tiffany, for being with us. I'd also like to thank President DeSalvo, Rich Ashew, Katrina Lantos Sweat, Ambassador Richard Sweat, and Neil Levesque for speaking at our event today. I'd also like to thank our great partners for today's event, the New Hampshire VFW, the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, the Business and Industry Association of New Hampshire, the New England World Affairs Council, and the New England Council for being great partners and friends to us today at our event. I also would like to especially thank two individuals who made this event truly great. Paul Chevalier, thank you for all of your help, and David Tilley, thank you for your help and support as well. Our President Liz Schraer has a saying that the difference between a good meeting and a great meeting is not what happens during the meeting, but what comes after. So I invite you all to help us make this a great meeting by joining us and supporting American global leadership and development and diplomacy alongside defense. We're not asking for any of your money. We're asking for your partnership and your support in this key and critical issue. In the next coming days, you'll be getting an email from me with highlights from today's event. We urge you to share that and the discussion that we have had today with your friends, family, coworkers, and colleagues. For all the veterans we have in the room today, and I know we have many veterans here, we urge you to join our Veterans for Smart Power Coalition, which is made up of over 30,000 veterans from all across the country, all united in support of smart power and strong development and diplomacy alongside defense. We ask you to join us at our next events as well. We look forward to working with you here in New Hampshire. And on behalf of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, thank you for joining us today.